welcome to the David Rolls Experience. Could we just kick things off by could you just give everyone a quick overview of who you are and what you do, first of all?
Yeah, very happy to, and thanks so much for having me, David. Background. I grew up in a kind of one of the smallest states in India, and very much an everyone knows everyone kind of place.
Right.
When I turned 18, I was ready to kind of spread my wings, and I moved from Goa to Bombay. And that's where I went to uni and I studied economics. And I talk about all the way back then because I remember coming to the end of my degree and just thinking, I know what I don't want to do.
Yeah.
I just don't know what I want to do. The typical path after economics is something in finance or something very corporate. And I don't know, it just felt like that wasn't for me. And so I remember when kind of Teach for India first came onto the horizon, and I started looking into what they did, and I thought, you know what, this would be great. It's gonna throw me in the deep end here. I'm gonna learn stuff I've never learned before, and really is gonna put me out of my comfort zone. So what Teach for India does is the equivalent in the UK is Teach First, and basically you have an extremely intense 6-week summer training, and then you're placed in a very low income community in a school, and you just have to figure it out and help your kids, and the aim here is to level the playing field for the poorest kids in India and some of their richer counterparts. And there was no handbook and no manual. You just it was very difficult.
What sort of challenges did you see, and what was the environment like? Because I suppose a good question actually would be to ask the environment you were used to. Like, were you used to a poorer environment anyway, or was it quite a big contrast to what you were used to?
Yeah, not at all, right? So Goa is one of the more egalitarian parts of India, I would say, where it's not as big. It was very visceral when I got to Bombay. You can see that that contrast that exists in a country like India. And I grew up very fortunate, very privileged, and so it was part of me wanting to give back, but it definitely was a real shock, right? Just and again, it wasn't like going into the classroom and just being their teacher. Even when we were at summer camp, like, we spent a day with one of the families that we were teaching. So very much, if they went to fill a bucket of water, you went with them. You kind of lived a day, even though you'll never really truly experience what it's like. It helps you be a lot more empathetic to the expectations that you then translate into the classroom, where you can be understanding if your student is tired and unfocused. You're not going to come down hard on them. You don't even know what the previous evening was like or that morning. It was very hard. The beginning of my fellowship was very hard. The kids didn't know me. They already had a previous Teach for India fellow that was finishing. And I would say hate is a strong word, but they probably hated me. I was replacing someone they knew and loved, and I went in with this big vision of the class theme is going to be about the Wizard of Oz, and here are the rules, and here are my posters, and here are the group names, and they were just like,
who is this person?
Who is this person? Why are you here? And what makes you think you can do a good job, with us? So they didn't love me immediately. And it wasn't really till I got it, it taught me a lot about getting to know. And I think that helps me a lot in my career today. But, who is the person on the other side of every conversation, every meeting?
Just empathy, really, isn't it? It's such a big thing in life as well. It took me a while to really try and understand, because the way I used to approach things, especially when I was younger, it was like, what do I want out of this conversation? And just not empathizing with people, not really understanding where they're coming from, the context of the conversation, their emotions and their mood at the time. And it's such I think it's just a big part of every role nowadays. You've got to be empathetic.
Yeah. Yeah, and especially in HR, I would say, that it definitely is a strength of mine, but it's something that is, brings a lot of value to the business too. I'm constantly thinking about who does this affect, and why does it matter to them? Whether it's a meeting, whether it's a policy, whether it's a change, whether it's even a perk, just who is on the receiving end of this, and why does it matter to them?
Yeah.
And I think I learned a lot about that in the early days of my fellowship.
Yeah. So how long were you there then?
So I did that for 3 years. And then one of the big things we were doing back then was teaching English, right? One of the ways to level the playing field for children in underprivileged communities versus their counterparts is the language. Everyone does a lot of business in English, universities in English, anything that they might want to do abroad. English is quite an important skill to have, and so it's one of the main things we were doing is teaching English. But none of us, in the second and third year of the fellowship, I was part of a smaller cohort that founded a different school, and none of us really had the academic background about language acquisition. We were definitely doing our best, and we were doing very well, and the children were doing very well. But that's why I came to the UK, because I wanted to study more about it, and that's why I went to Durham.
Why did you choose Durham?
Good question. It was so it's a very funny story about why I maybe this will be the part we edit out of the podcast.
No, go ahead.
But I initially wanted to go to Oxford, and I applied for the Rhodes Scholarship in India, and it starts with like 800 applicants. And I got down to the top 15 in the country.
Wow. Okay.
But they only pick 5, and I didn't get into 5. And it was one of the most difficult experiences to go through. Success came easily to younger me, and it was, I would say, one of the first big life setbacks I had, where I set my mind to achieve something, and I got close, but I didn't get there. And so I didn't get the Rhodes Scholarship, and consequently didn't go to Oxford. But I'd almost set my sights on that and decided that was my plan. So with that setback of not getting the Rhodes Scholarship, I literally had to start again. And so when I was doing more in-depth research then about kind of second language acquisition programs in the UK, the course at Durham actually even ranked above Oxford. But I was so fixated on the idea of the prestige that comes with going to Oxford and being a Rhodes Scholar, that I hadn't even looked into any of the other options. And and then when I did and saw that there were other equally good or better ones, I applied to a few, and got in everywhere, and then ultimately picked Durham because it was the best ranking course. But the reason I talk about, I don't very openly talk about the Rhodes Scholarship experience, but it's I had been, through my fellowship, really working on making a shift from having a very fixed mindset in life, right? I think if success comes easily academically, and I'm wired very much to succeed in an Indian system where you rely a lot on your memory, you rely a lot on kind of making those connections between subjects, and so success came easily in that system, but it didn't with the Rhodes Scholarship. And so I'd been working a lot on kind of moving away from a fixed mindset where if something went wrong, it was a reflection on who I am, and very much a growth mindset too. Well, this didn't quite go my way, so what can I learn from it, and how can I move on? And so even though I was trying to move to or train myself to think differently, that was the first time I almost felt like a setback, where I'd spent such a long time, really trying to model a growth mindset, and then a true life setback happened, and it almost felt like the end of the world.
One of my favorite sayings is the worst thing to happen to you is the worst thing to happen to you, because it doesn't matter. For example, that's some people would say that's like a first world problem or whatever, but like a privileged problem to have. But it's all relevant or relative to the context of your life, right? Because it doesn't matter if you've stubbed your toe or not got into Oxford, or your parents died or whatever. The worst thing to happen to you is the worst thing to happen to you. So you would react to that the same way you'd react to any other situation that was still perceived by you as such a bad thing, right?
Yeah. No, so you're right. It's a problem really of privilege. But like you say, I still lived it. It happened to me. I set my mind to achieve something, and very rarely did I not. And this is the first time, or it was one of the first times. Yeah, it felt monumental. Anyway, so that's what brought me to Durham, and then it was funny to see that the course was actually ranked the top course in the UK that year. And if I had not had the Oxford experience and not gone to Durham, I would have never known that. And so much of where my life is right now, yeah, call it fate, call it whatever, but I mean, I was almost destined to go to Durham. It was an incredible course. I made some great friendships. I met my partner at Durham. Even my professors back then, I'm still in touch with some of them. Some really great connections. Anyway, so when I finished at Durham, I decided that I wanted to stay on in the UK for longer. And so I kind of married up two things that I was involved with and good at. I was very good kind of organizationally, operationally. And then I had all this prior experience in education. And so that's when I started working at Explore Learning. And it was a kind of management position still within education, and I slowly kind of branched towards, it was my first experience kind of recruiting, first experience with a lot of HR stuff. And then I continued on an operations pathway, and when I joined Echobox, I started on the wider operations team, right? There were 30 of us on the team, and it was a kind of a team of 3 or 4 people in ops, and we did everything, and hiring was and recruiting was one part, but there was also payroll and other HR things and finance, and in a smaller company, operations is everything that doesn't have a defined other function. And then as we scaled, different people from within the operations team began to specialize in the departments of their specialization, and it was just natural for me to focus on the people side of operations. And nearly 4 years later, here I am. Yeah.
So were you surprised at how varied your role was within a startup? Because I know a lot of people, they go in and they're they're surprised that they're doing other things within a startup and their responsibilities are stretched. Because maybe they've worked for a bigger company, and for bigger companies you're typically you're focusing on one job, aren't you?
Yeah, I'd never had a corporate job like that before, so I wasn't surprised, and it also wasn't new. In my Teach for India fellowship, the remit was, at the end of your fellowship, your students have to be better off than when you first went in.
Yeah.
And we did everything, made the connections with the children, planned lessons, did tests, actually taught. So I literally was thrown into the deep end from my very first job. Even at Explore Learning, the day was split into the half of the day when the children were in the center, and so you could have been tutoring or doing parents meetings or kind of observing and giving feedback on the assistant managers or the tutors. And the first half of the day was market the center, do workshops at schools, go out on remote marketing events to book trials to increase the center sales, retention, finance, collections. It was everything. So all of my roles had been so much of everything that at Echobox it wasn't strange. I wasn't surprised, and I really like that. It's it keeps the days varied, but it just helps you have such an impact over such a wide range of things.
Yeah, I suppose it's quite fulfilling as well, right? Coming into an early stage startup and having such an impact across so many different departments rather than just, focusing on one particular vertical.
Yeah, and I think it's also the easiest way to make connections with people, and, that's what makes me tick, connections and watching people grow and succeed. And no better way to do that than if you're involved in so many different parts of the business. Yeah.
So what would you say then? This might be quite a long answer, But what would you say are like the main challenges you faced working in and scaling a startup?
It's a good question. I think the first one that I encountered was that there's a manual for some things, but not for everything. And especially if it's an idea that you have that you're bringing to the table. At a smaller company, it's not like you bring an idea to the table and someone else takes care of it. If you bring the idea to the table, you then also have to be able to execute. And so we'd done some things before and we did them really well and we continued doing them as we did them. And then other things, we had to think about creative ways to achieve them, and there just wasn't a manual. And maybe no one else had done that before.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think that was the first challenge. Some things I could learn because I observed other people, and some things I just had to figure out on my own. So that's one. I think one of the main challenges with recruiting, or at least personally for me, because I hadn't done any kind of technical recruiting before.
How did you find that? How did you learn about that and like figure out how to do it? Because obviously I went down the traditional route of actually being a tech recruiter, learning off tech recruiters. It's obviously very different for you because you're not like in an agency or anything. But
yeah, I was really lucky. I think because I was when I joined Echobox, it was to really take over and own that part of the business. I worked very closely with, I learned a lot from my own manager at the time, but I also learned a lot from working closely with our CEO. There was obviously stuff to read and study, and I did a lot of research on my own because to be able to hire good people, you have to come across credible. And especially because we were hiring so many engineers, there was a lot to learn and read about, and not just to be able to say a phrase like AWS, but really understand what it means, because you're going to get questions on it in an interview, right? So the people helped, and I asked a lot of questions, but I had to spend a lot of time also just reading and studying it on my own to get good. So that was a challenge, I would say. I just came from a really different background than tech, so when I started working in tech, there was a steep kind of knowledge learning curve.
Did you have like a system for I suppose this would be a good tip for like other internal tech recruiters, but did you have a system or like a map or something for across all the different technologies? Because like I know for example AWS has so many little like there's like different versions of it and different little bits that you need to learn, and that's just like one cloud technology, and then you obviously got all the other stuff. But did you have like a particular way that you would memorize all of this?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think for me it was maybe the range of roles, right? We were recruiting for front-end engineers and back-end engineers and DevOps engineers and data science and product managers and product designers, and yes, there's a lot to learn.
It's a minefield.
But I think just one role at a time. The things that really helped me were to look at the description of the jobs and just make sure that I can very credibly talk about everything on there. So if it said you need to be very familiar with React, I better know that that's a framework, and that someone might say Angular or something else, and they're talking about the same thing, just a different framework. So I think that, so maybe doing it role by role, going through the ad and really understanding, if we're saying we need the person to be proficient at this, like what does that mean?
I used to, because I obviously train people as well, and the way, because I still know like senior tech recruiters who mix things up, and they're like, oh, JavaScript's back end, or no, but it can also be front end, and like stuff like that, or they'll get confused between JavaScript and Java. I think it's quite especially when you're talking about like QA, because QA say Java scripting. Like I write Java scripts, and you're like, yeah, JavaScript. No, Java scripts. But the way I used to explain tech stuff, because I when I first started, I was trying to do what you did, and like fully understand stuff, and I actually just found it like fried my brain. So I was like, okay, cool. What I'm going to do is I'm going to break things down into how I could explain it to a 10-year-old, and then not only is that easier for me to digest, but also it's easier for me to teach. So I'd be like, for example, the framework is the pad, the code, the Java language is the pen, and just sort of break it down like that.
Yeah, it's a good, and I think for me, just doing it again and again and again, and sometimes getting it wrong, and just thinking about, what did I mix up there? But I've easily done over 1,000 interviews. I mean,
yeah,
easily, right? Without even having to do the maths, and when you do it again and again and again and again and again, people will ask different questions that you haven't seen before, and maybe to that particular person you say, I'll come back to you, but I would never have to say I'll come back to you to a second person, because if someone asked me a question I didn't know, I think that's also just, like you said, it's a minefield, right? How do you learn everything? You can't. So can you learn enough to, be really confident on that call? And then people will ask you questions that you don't know, and just taking the time to learn it. But yeah, so I would say that was another challenge, along with not having a manual for everything. Just that it was a steep learning curve, branching into tech. And then, one of the early challenges, we talked about this when we worked together too, is just how do we make sure as we're growing the team, that we stay as diverse as possible. And we did a very good job before I joined Echobox of making sure we were culturally diverse. So, we had, even as a team of 30, people from at least 12, 14 different parts of the world. So, we all came from different cultures. But I think there was definitely some room for us with gender diversity, and as we scaled and began to grow the commercial teams as well, we were also able to hire more recent graduates, so it helped our age diversity a lot. But I would say that was maybe one of the early challenges too, was to make sure we were a team of 30 and we only had a couple other female employees in the company. So
with on diversity hiring, right? Because obviously this is like a constantly trending topic at the moment. How is it? I know I'm not expecting you to solve the problem. Don't worry, because if you did, this podcast would go viral. But what do you think of like the systems where, because they've got it in? I think they had it in American football. It's called the Rooney Rule, and they brought it over into different sports in the Premier League. I think they have it now, where, for example, they have to interview they have to interview a person of color. They have to interview like an African American in the NFL, and that even if you're interviewing 9 white people, you have to have a temp who's person of color. Do you? Because I know it's a difficult one, because it's like people should be hired on merit, obviously, but at the same time, do you have to sort of like force the issue a little bit, or how do you strike that balance? And I don't know, how have you guys gone about it?
It's a great question, and I don't think, kind of forcing yourself to meet a quota, it can help. I think one of the problems that we would have to be careful of, is making sure it's not a checkbox exercise, right? Like, I'm just doing it because I have to, rather than, who is the best person for this role.
Yeah.
Like you said, one of the challenges, with who is the best person for this role? Well, if you're interviewing an engineer, it's just a male-dominated candidate pool. So if we're really picking the best person, and there are so many more males than females, you're far more likely to first find a male candidate that would fit the role, right? So, a few things have helped us with this. One is to, as we've scaled, it's a very hard problem for us to have solved just in engineering alone. And we're very proud to have kind of female engineers and female data scientists on the team. But, it didn't come from kind of forcing that and saying it has, we have to hire a female employee for this particular role. I think what really helped us was just expanding the departments that we're hiring, and, making sure that we're not just hiring from pools that are male dominated. So as we started growing the sales team and the customer success team, the HR team, the business development team, finance, suddenly it was a much more equal balance where you can just as easily find a great female applicant, because there are so many more females that studied that particular topic and then again, as we began to have enough senior people as a base to be able to coach and train, and we could hire grads, that really made a difference to to the number, because that was a problem that I was very keen to solve at Echobox. That I was the third female employee to join, but I didn't want it to stop with me.
Yeah. So what's the from your perspective? What's the benefits of having a more diverse team as opposed to English white males? Like how have you seen? What positive have you seen having a diverse team? Because I think some people potentially listening to this might need to be sold on the idea of putting in that bit of extra effort to get a diverse team because they just don't fully understand the benefits of it.
Yeah. To me, it's just the diversity of thoughts around a table, right? 5, and if we, maybe we just go off on a tangent here for a second, but I remember we had a diversity workshop at Echobox and we said, on the surface, 5 white men could very much come across as a not diverse group of 5. But if they've had very different experiences where, one of them grew up extremely privileged, one of them grew up quite poor, one of them comes from a family background where I don't know, that's very, they may not all be the same 5 white, so that's what we explored a little bit in our conversation. Does it go just beyond, is this person white or not white? Is this person male or not male? Maybe there's a diversity of backgrounds there, which could help. But I think it's just the diversity of thoughts. You just have such different lived experiences that what you can contribute to any discussion is so much more valuable than if it's someone that grew up in exactly the same place with exactly the same mindset and exactly the same thinking about things. You kind of you then subscribe to a group of people that think in exactly the same way with no one to challenge to say, hey, have we thought about that?
Yeah, it's not even about education, is it? It's sometimes it's about lack of a formal education because maybe they've taken another route.
Yeah,
and people, that from what I've seen and from people I've spoken to, the benefits do seem to come from just a completely different way of thinking and coming from a completely different culture. They would come up with ideas that I wouldn't come up with because I've grown up in the UK. And I definitely feel like some companies really fall down on that side, and then also they get stuck in they get stuck in a rut really with the diversity side of things, because I would imagine that if you've got, say you were just 30 males, a startup company, 30 white males, it would then become very difficult to hire a female or whatever, because they would be coming in and they'd probably feel a little bit out of place. Yeah. So you have to sort of get it right straight away, really, don't you?
Yeah. And very consciously slow. And maybe just humanizing the example, right? Imagine that same company with 30 white males, and again, they can have different kind of diverse backgrounds in terms of other things, but let's, for the purpose of the example, say that they don't, and they all went to the same university and grew up in the same town or whatever. Imagine a group like that trying to forward plan and say, whenever we have females joining the company, let's put together a parental leave policy. Let's put together a maternity policy, right? You really don't want a group of 30 white men putting together the maternity policy for future women joining the company. They just don't have enough insight and any context to be able to put together what a good policy with the right considerations would be, or what
you'd be guessing, wouldn't you? You'd be, as a man, I to be honest, you wouldn't even, when I'm thinking of benefits, I wouldn't even consider it. I would just be thinking, annual leave and stuff that I like, because I suppose that's what you do, don't you? You it's really hard to, and we go back to the whole empathy thing, but it's really hard sometimes to realise that you're not putting yourself in someone else's shoes or someone else's background shoes, and then you wouldn't naturally think of stuff like maternity leave and other stuff. If you're not a parent, I've seen this before. If you're not a parent and you've got a team who are parents, and they're you just don't have any empathy sometimes for flexible working and 4 hours sleep a night and taking your kids to school and that sort of stuff.
Which day of the week do you do your socials? Is it a family day or not family day?
That's true.
Little things like that. I think it really makes a difference to have a variety of voices contributing to any kind of decision making.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you just get stuck doing what you know. You know, it's interesting. You said, "Are you a parent? Are you also in any kind of caring responsibility? Right? Are you a single white male? Do you have a partner who can maybe carry the home responsibilities that you might have? If yes, your attitude towards a policy would be quite different than if not. Like, what if you were the main, I don't know, a single dad, right? You'd approach everything at your work very differently. The things that would be important to you are very different to your white male colleague. He's just single, you know, and doesn't have the, So I think, diversity, and sometimes it could just be like male or female or white versus non-white, but I think it's so much more, you know, parents, not parents, kind of married, not married, caring responsibilities, not caring responsibilities.
It's interesting that I don't think I've ever had a discussion with someone about diversity, and they've actually talked about, well, even if they're like the same colour, like they have different backgrounds, so they're still diverse in a sense, just not visually.
Yeah.
Which is interesting perspective. One thing I am really interested about for you specifically in your role, because I know your journey and I know what you've done and the progression. Your progression within your career has accelerated quite quickly, I would say, and you're working for like a really reputable company, and you know, obviously fast growing, and your responsibilities have probably changed quite drastically. So how do you, and how has this evolved, but how do you like manage your day? How do you like plan your day, plan your week, organize tasks? And do you have any like productivity hacks that we could benefit from?
Yeah, good question. I think we could spend a lot of time talking about it. There are a few, you know, and these are key things that I maybe try to teach my team, which is why I think they might be useful to share. I'm a big fan of Inbox Zero. So, you know, nothing piles up in my inbox. When I receive it, it goes into one of many folders depending on when I need to action and do that. And I like to prioritize based on urgent versus important. And you really want to be spending the most time that you have doing things that are important rather than just became urgent.
Have you read 7 Habits of Highly Effective People?
I have. So it's interesting. When I read 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, that's not when I embodied this principle. The principle that I really resonated with when I read that book was the circle of control. And that has helped me. You haven't read that. No. It's an interesting book. But that's basically how I categorize my inbox. So it goes into one of these various folders for when I have to action it. I do use a task management tool as well. And so again, it just helps me stay on top of my to-do list.
What tool is that?
So we use Asana.
That's like Trello, isn't it? Similar sort of thing.
Yeah, a little bit. Just kind of helps again in a company that has like remote working and kind of people in the office on different days and across different departments. And again, in my role now, kind of collaborating across sales and CS and business development and HR. I think having a tool that everyone subscribes to. I'm a big fan of over communicating, so making sure that I constantly update. You know, even if someone hasn't, I don't just update someone when they ask me for an update. If I have an update to give, it goes into that task and, you know, people can access and read it at their own time, but just so everyone knows where everyone is. So big fan of over communication.
That's probably why we worked so well together, actually, when I was working with you, because I'm an over communicator as well. I'd rather give too much information and, you know, update people with no news than just ghost or just nothing, which is, it's interesting you say that now looking back, because some people don't like that, do they? They're like, why are you updating me? But I always think I always think it's better to update someone with no news than just like
even to say like, I'm still working, just FYI, I'm still working on this. I will come back to you. I expect it to be like a week from now, right? Rather than someone saying, oh, I really haven't heard about this in a long time. Right. I'm just gonna, worst of all, maybe interrupt Lara like at the office and go to her desk and say, you know, what's happening with this? But nonetheless, right, it's just, so staying on top of things like that helps a lot. And then I think one of the things that, I can't advocate enough as you get more senior is to empower people that you work with, whether it's people that report to you or colleagues, to be able to, almost make it so that you don't have to be in every conversation and every decision, but that you've equipped someone with the skills and the thinking to be able to make that decision. And, you know, most often if they've worked closely enough with you and you get along well, they'll make the decision right. And sometimes they won't. And, you know, you can fix it if it doesn't happen. But I think that has really helped to have different people at different points in different teams, like be able to take point on certain things, because there reaches a point where you just cannot do everything yourself, right? So having a strong team and empowering them.
On that, because I know that's, you know, delegating is usually like a sign of a good leader, right? And you're always going to hit, because you're only one person, you're always going to hit like a bottleneck if you don't. But did that come naturally to you, or did you struggle with, like, you know, some people are for lack of a better term, control freaks. So they're like, oh, I don't want to delegate that meeting to that person, or I don't want to delegate that task to that person because they think it might be done wrong, and they'll be like, oh, I would have done it myself better, sort of thing. Did you struggle with that, or was that just natural?
No, anyone that has kind of perfectionist tendencies will always struggle with that. I think for me, if you are the most senior person of a team that you're leading, the probability is you can do a given task quicker and more efficiently than someone else in the team, right? That's why you're the most senior person. That's why you're the leader of that team. I think where the kind of mindset shift has to happen is the other person who's going to do it going to do maybe not as good a job as you, but a great enough job that makes that task, you know, done well, and you didn't have to do it, right? Because I think for me, gradually the realization just hit, because again, we you know, when we were growing, operations was doing everything. You know, it was HR and recruiting and finance, and, you know, you wouldn't have different departments for a team of 30. You know, why would you? We were such a small company. And so you just ran out of hours in the day.
I think as well, like, if you don't delegate things, then how are people supposed to improve? Yeah. Because I think that's how you get, when you get managers who are like control freaks, and they just try and do everything, the people never get put in, their people never get put in uncomfortable situations. And I think you have to encourage failure as well, like, or change people's relationship with failure. Yeah. Because you can't fear it, can you? Otherwise, you're not going to progress and get better.
And that kind of ties back to that mindset conversation we were having, and kind of not getting the roads. You know, if it was 18, 19, 20-year-old me, I think I would have been a very different leader than me today, where, that mindset or the attitude towards failure is just so different. You know, it's very rare that someone that you've trained, if you're good, is going to make a mistake that is so catastrophic. And so if you constantly get your team to worry about, you know, we definitely want to have attention to detail and do things right and make sure we've done every check possible to get something out the door the best it can be. But the attitude towards, well, there was a slight slip up while doing it, well, it's going to happen, you know.
Yeah. I mean, it's good to have that sort of culture, environment and support, because, I mean, otherwise you just can't grow, and then you can't have people coming into work being so scared of failure that they just don't take risks, and they just don't be creative, and they don't contribute ideas as well. Like, when you get shut down, it's nothing worse than contributing ideas in a meeting room or something, and, you know, that alone took a lot of courage to do so, and then you get shut down, and you're like, oh, I'm never going to do that again. Yeah.
And I think that, you know, that kind of awareness as a manager, and it's very important for organizations to make sure, you're absolutely right, that leaders also have the right mindsets to lead, because it's a skill to learn, right? How to be a good leader, how to be a good manager. You know, you don't just wake up one day with either a manual or all the skills to do it. And it helped also being kind of open with the team about that, to say, look, I have extremely high expectations for how we present things, how we do things, you know, and you lead by example, so you don't submit anything sloppy, and so they don't submit anything sloppy. Yep. But if we all align on what really great looks like, and someone makes a mistake in the journey of getting to really great, well, you know, otherwise you'd do it. You know, if you had all the time, you'd do it. clearly
Yeah.
you don't have the time or the bandwidth, or you need to delegate, and so you just make your peace with the fact that it's probably not going to be as quick and efficient as you. But sometimes that's not. Again, back to diversity, right? Like, it's who is the person that's doing this task, and maybe they have a different idea of how to approach it than you, and they bring something to the table that you would have never thought about.
Yeah, their version of good is different to your version of good.
Yeah.
And I think also there's a good enough factor as well, right? Not everything has to be 10 out of 10, let's be honest. Like, a lot of the time, you're actually probably better off doing like an 8 out of 10 job, so you can focus on, like you said, the important and non-urgent tasks that help build long-term success. But I think an interesting way to close this off would be, obviously you work in the AI space.
Yeah.
Lots of talk at the moment about ChatGPT. I know people are sick of talking about it. Is it ChatGPT or ChatGPT?
ChatGPT.
P, right?
Yeah.
I always get it wrong. I did a post not long ago and I spelled it wrong. I think I did a TikTok actually, and luckily no one pulled me up on it. But I was just like, shows how much I know about tech, right? But it's obviously really interesting because I feel like we're at this point now in AI where there was nothing's. You might disagree because you've got more of an insider track than me, but I don't feel like anything's taken like an enormous leap in a while. When you get like for example, the internet, incredible. Like we never could have even guessed how big it was going to be. Even the sci-fi films got it wrong a lot of the time. And obviously like smartphones are a big thing, but when was that? 2007. So I feel like now we're with these what's it called? A language processing model. I think it's called
Natural language processing.
I think
general.
I think that's what ChatGPT is, isn't it? It's got like a language processing model or something. That the official term. But this seems to be like the next big thing, and then it's obviously going to lead on to incredible stuff. Just self-learning AI. It's mental. It's without the lack of a better term. Where do you see the tech AI world moving in the next 5-10 years? What's your opinion of it all?
It's a good question, and you can either look at it through a lens of that's so scary. What jobs is this thing going to displace? And because that happens, right, with every big advancement. If suddenly a group of people that used to do that thing that has now been advanced are no longer required to do that thing, right? And you can always look at it from, well, that scares me. What does it mean for employment, and what does it mean? The way I prefer to look at it is as what stuff can the machine do that the machine does better than me, and what things can it just not do better than me, right? So it can definitely automate tasks. It can definitely do all of these things. It can process data way quicker than I would be able to do on my own. And so I think in terms of a trend, I think it's going to, displace a lot, shake up a lot. We always at Echobox, we talk about how it really is, algorithms and AI, it's going to help in terms of saving time, saving resources, and being able to redirect to things that human beings will always do better than machines, relationships and empathy. And I think it's exciting. AI definitely, like you said, what's the next big thing? It has definitely been AI, and it's definitely been, can't wait for a time where we start thinking about things in terms of, how can I free up all this time, because AI can do all of the stuff for me so easily, and I just...
So you're very optimistic, basically.
I'm very optimistic. And I can choose my path, right? I can choose to sit here and be really worried and anxious and scared about it. But going back to the 7 habits of highly effective people, that's completely outside my circle of control. So
yeah, it's not stopping. The train's not stopping. The funny thing is, people like Elon Musk, for example. Elon was ringing the warning bell for quite some time about AI, because he was like, once we kick this off, once it's past the threshold of we're not stopping it, and we're way past that point now. So I think the people who are going to be successful in the next 10 or 20 years are going to be the ones that roll with it and adapt with it. And yes, there's going to be changes, even within the recruitment industry and the HR industry. There's going to be a lot of things that are automated and a lot of things that have taken over by AI. But it is nice to speak to optimistic people because I know there's a lot of doom and gloom out there, and everyone's like, oh, the whole world's going to be run by robots in 100 years, and they're not going to need us, and that sort of stuff, which is very strange and sci-fi and Terminator-y, but yeah, it's good to hear someone within the industry being optimistic.
No, yeah, I am. I mean, I'm optimistic as a person, but it can do so much to make the really mundane, boring parts of my day not boring and mundane, because I could just replace that time doing something that brings me a lot more joy than having to manually sift through all this data to figure it out, right? If it can do that better than me, then do it, and I'll do the things that I do better than it. So yeah, I'm extremely positive, and yeah, I'm just a hopeful person.
Well, it's better than being pessimistic for sure. One last question. What advice would you give to a younger Lara? Like I don't know, 18-year-old Lara?
Yeah, good question. I think about that a lot, actually. And honestly, it's almost like anticlimactic advice, so it's no big... it's just to relax. Things will fall into place the way they're meant to fall into place, and don't sweat the small stuff, which I used to a lot, and I'm really on a journey to do less of. And yeah, just don't relax, don't sweat the small stuff.
Cool. Well, I think that's a good way to end the podcast. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you, David. It's been great.
Awesome. Glad you had fun.
Yeah, really did.